I wanted to post this so people would know what happened, so the real truth would be known no matter what official sources might say. I'm a pretty reasonable guy, or at least I think so. I've worked in a state park for years now, and I have yet to come across any problems I couldn't handle. Until the day my boss approached me with an unusual request. Being the calm, cool individual that I am, I replied in my usual low-key style. "You want me to what?" I said, trying to keep my voice under control so my boss didn't fire me. "Look, I know this is weird," Ken said. "I'm having a little problem with it myself, but if it's true, we need to do something." "But why me?" "Because you're our best tracker. I'm 5'4", weigh 130 pounds soaking wet, and you want me to go out and track down." I lowered my voice so it would stay confined to the boss's office. "An imaginary creature that could be twice or 3 times my size." "I don't know," he said. "That's the thing, no matter how much research I do, there's always another expert with conflicting information." "That's because it's all made up," I said. "Stories passed down from one generation to the next, until someone decided to make some money by writing a book about it or filming a blurry video, then all bets were off." Ken sighed. "I don't disagree with you, and if you go out there and find it's a rogue mountain lion or bear, I'll be the first one to congratulate you. It's just, we have to do something. 5 hikers have gone missing, vanished without a trace, and that's just in the last 2 weeks. We have to at least show the public that we're trying." It was my turn to sigh. "I understand that, but who cooked up this cockamamie idea of cryptids hunting hikers in the park?" "It was Glenn who first told me he had seen something strange," he said. "At first I blew it off as ridiculous just like you did, but the more he told me the more I thought this might need looking into." "Well, if you're going to make me do this, you may as well give me Glenn as a partner." I was thinking the same thing. Since he found the tracks and seems to be pretty well versed in this cryptid crap, it only makes sense. "Nothing about this makes sense," I said. "I know, but I appreciate you taking one for the team." Yeah, I said, waving him off. "Just make sure you tell Glenn I'm in charge." "Absolutely, and you can call me anytime if you need extra help." "Extra help?" I said. "To track down something that doesn't exist. I think I've got it handled." "Good luck." I shook my head as I stepped out into the cool autumn air. September had been unseasonably warm, but the last week had brought cooler weather and the threat of early winter. In other places that might not be such a problem, but here in the mountains, snow could be deadly. I wasn't looking forward to winter in the least, but then I never do. I looked out over the foothills of the mountains that were still green, but had just a hint of the leaves about to change. I knew that soon this would be one of the most beautiful places on earth. I found Glenn out on the trail. He was bent over examining the ground when I walked up. He stood and looked down at me. At 6'2", he towered over me, and even though he never said anything about it, I always got the feeling it gave him a superior feeling. Maybe it was just me. "Hey," he said. "Hey back, you find something here?" "I can't be sure," he said. "It looks like a track, but it's weird." I bent down and took a look. "It's a bear," I said after a quick glance. "Are you sure?" "100%. "I'm not so sure," he said, bending down again. "It's a bear," I said more forcefully. "What's your problem?" he said, standing up so I would have to look up at him. "My problem is getting sent out of this wild cryptid chase," I said. "You know they don't exist, right?" He glared at me. "Are you gonna be like this the whole time?" he said. "Because if so, then Ken needs to find me another assistant." "Assistant?" I said. "Didn't he call you?" "No." "Well, I guess you missed the memo," I said. "I'm the one in charge of this investigation." He laughed. "I'll just bet Ken put you in charge." "What's that supposed to mean? I'm the best tracker around here." "Yeah, you're a legend in your own mind." "Call Ken," I said. "I don't need to call him." "Yes, you really do," I said, holding out my phone. "Fine." He took the phone and dialed the number. I enjoyed watching his face fall by degrees as the conversation went on its very short course. He hung up and tossed the phone back, looking like he had just sucked on a lemon. "So where do we start, boss?" he said, venom dripping from every word. "Where did you find the original tracks that started all this?" "Just down this trail a ways." "Let's go." We proceeded down the trail. He seemed to be slouching as if he was a little kid sulking because someone had taken his favorite toy. He did get his petty little revenge though. As he led the way, he took fast, long strides, forcing me to nearly run to keep up. I didn't want to say anything because that meant he'd won, but I wasn't sure how long I could keep up the track meet, especially going up and down the hills on the trail. When he finally stopped, I was winded, but I did all I could not to let him see. I took long, slow breaths even though my lungs were screaming for air. He glanced at me. "You okay?" he said. "Fine," I said, not giving him the satisfaction. "Where are these tracks?" He pointed them out and I bent down to get a closer look. I said. "Let me guess," he said in his most sarcastic voice. "It's a bear." "Definitely not," I said, looking up at his face that was filled with surprise. "It looks like something else. I'm not sure exactly what." "What do you mean?" "I mean, at first glance it looks like a mountain lion, but the shape is a little different. So, it's a cryptid print," he said, nearly bouncing on his toes. "Slow down there. All I said was the shape was a little different," I said. "That's not exactly concrete evidence. But it's something." "Yeah, it's something, but we don't know what yet." "Well, let's find some more tracks," he said, looking around at the ground. "I've already found some more, but they all look like these," I said. "They must have been made by the same animal." "It's not an animal," he said defensively. "Okay, look, I get it. You're young, you haven't been here very long. What, like a year now?" 10 months. "You want to prove yourself," I said. "And that's great. But we need to take this slow and be sure of what we find, otherwise, we'll end up in one of the tabloids as the idiots who searched for the invisible cryptid." He stepped back and sighed deeply. "I understand. Okay, so now let's take a slow approach and find out what really happened without tainting the evidence with a premature perception." "Alright," he said. "The animal tracks go away from the trail. Do they look like there was a struggle here?" "Not really," I said, examining them. "So this might not be whatever took the hikers. It might be another animal just crossing the path." "You're right. Where were the hikers last seen?" "On this trail, a little further down, but nobody seems to know if they doubled back and came through here a second time." I stood and brushed my uniform off. "Let's head that way then." I started out and he fell in step beside me, matching my pace. It was nice to be able to go at my own speed. As we got closer, I stopped and looked up at the trees. "You hear that?" I said. He cocked his head for a moment. "I don't hear anything," he said. "That's exactly my point. We should be hearing birds and all kinds of wildlife, but we aren't." "What's that mean?" I paused and looked him in the eye. "It means there's a predator nearby." We both took a long, close look all around. The thing is, when you're in a forest, there are 1,000 places to hide. There could be a creature sneaking up on us only a few feet away, and we wouldn't know until it was too late. "Come on," I said. "Let's get to where we need to be." I won't lie, I picked up the pace a bit, and my eyes were constantly searching the trees. Glenn was on such full alert that he nearly tripped and fell twice. It didn't take us long to get to the spot. As we approached, we saw an older man standing there staring at the trees. He seemed disheveled and dirty. It was clear that he wasn't a recreational hiker, he was something else. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "Do you hike through here often?" "Why?" he said quickly, his eyes darting back and forth between us. "This park is public land. I can come and go as I please, and you can't stop me." The entire time he was talking, he was also pointing a wrinkled finger in my face. "We're not here to harass you or tell you what you can and can't do," Glenn said. "We're looking for some hikers who went missing." His face brightened. "Why didn't you say so?" he said. "Sure, I saw some hikers go through here the other day." "Do you remember around what time it was?" I said. "It was midday, I know that much," he said. "I don't have much use for a watch anymore." "Did you see how many hikers there were?" Glenn said. 3, I think. 2 women and a man." "Anything else you can tell us about them?" I said. They were young, probably in their 20s, he said. They looked good. What do you mean? I said. They looked good, he said, glancing toward the trail. You know, they were attractive kids, the kind you'd see in magazine commercials. Glenn and I exchanged glances. Do you live around here? Glenn said. The man stepped back and seemed to take a defensive stance. I thought you said you wasn't here to harass me. We're not, I said slowly. We're just asking some questions. You're free to leave anytime. I want to leave, he said, pushing through us and heading down the trail. Have a nice day, sir, I called after him. He didn't turn and look back. In an instant he was out of sight. Glenn stepped over to me. What do you think? He said. I think he knows more than he's saying, I said, staring at the empty trail. They looked good, Glenn said. You caught that too, I said. That seemed a little odd. I think he might be our killer, Glenn said. You really think he could have taken on 3 20-somethings by himself? Not in that form. Here we go, I said, rolling my eyes. Skinwalkers can change shape. What the hell is a skinwalker? It's a shapeshifter, he said. They turn into animals when they hunt. That's convenient, I said. So now we're hunting an animal that isn't an animal but looks just like other animals. So, if we come across it, how will we know if it's him or just some other random animal? Glenn stared at me. I don't know. Well, I'm glad you've thought it through, I said, starting back the trail. Where are you going? He called after me. To ask that old man some more questions. He shook his head and took one more look around the area. For some reason, being surrounded by trees made him suddenly uncomfortable. He saw the hundreds of hiding places where a predator could be sitting, waiting. He trotted off after me. When he rounded the corner, he nearly trampled me as I stood still in the middle of the trail. What the? He said before following my eyes to see why I had stopped. There was a mountain lion standing in the middle of the trail, staring at us and showing its teeth. That's him, he whispered in my ear, making me jump. Him who? I said, annoyed. The old man. Are you nuts? I whispered. He's in his animal form, Glenn said. That's why he's looking so aggressive at us. He's looking so aggressive at us because we're his weekly snack. The entire time we were talking, I was slowly reaching for my gun. Once it had cleared the holster, I flicked off the safety and slowly drew it up. Don't shoot him, Glenn said. We need to find out where the hikers are. I'm not going to shoot him, I said, raising the gun slowly in the air and pulling the trigger. The gunshot echoed all through the hillside. The effect was instant. The mountain lion bolted down the trail like its tail was on fire. Why'd you do that? Glenn said. Because I didn't want to get eaten, I said, sliding my gun into its holster. We needed to get him to tell us where the hikers are. I stared into his eyes. My incredulous feeling couldn't stay hidden any longer. That was not the old man, I yelled. That was a mountain lion. It's his cryptid form, he said, causing me to walk away in disgust. He followed behind me, each of us frustrated because the other was being so stupid and couldn't see the truth. When we got back to the truck, I drove to the station. The sun was sitting on the horizon waiting to drop behind the mountain. We drove in silence. When we got there, we each got into our personal vehicles and drove away. I got home and threw myself on the couch. I grabbed a pillow from beside me and held it against my face while I screamed in frustration. After I was done, I sat there for a while. Eventually, I got up, went over to the computer, sighed, and typed in cryptids. The next morning, Glenn and I got to the ranger station door at the same time. We each stood there holding our coffee like some Old West standoff until finally I pulled the door open and he walked inside. How'd you two make out yesterday? Ken said when he saw us. It was, Glenn started. Bullshit, I thought. Stupid, pointless, annoying. Challenging, he said. Ken looked at me and I shrugged. So, we're no closer to finding those hikers, Ken said. We do have one lead, Glenn said. No, we don't, I said. We have a suspect, he said as if I hadn't spoken. No, we don't. Because my partner allowed him to get away. Because he's not a suspect, he's just some old man who can turn into a predator. No, he can't. Ken had been watching us go back and forth like a tennis match until he had had enough, he yelled, drawing the attention of the rest of the rangers in the room. "You two, my office now," he said, then marched toward his door. We followed along, not saying a word. Once we were in the office, Ken slammed the door closed. "What the hell is wrong with you two?" he said. "I gave you a job, find the hikers. You seem to have heard. Act like two toddlers in a playground fighting over a ball." He wanted to accost this old guy who looked like he was homeless, I said. "He was a skinwalker, I know it," Glenn said. "Okay, this has to stop," Ken said. "You need to accept that he is in charge," he said, pointing to me. "And you need to accept that there might be something to his theory," he said to me, "regardless of whether you believe it or not." Glenn and I stared at each other with mutual distrust. "Enough," Ken said. "Work together or I'll fire you both, got it? Now get the hell out of my office." We both turned and reached for the door at the same time. He beat me to it and wore a smug expression as he opened the door. It was my turn to wear the expression when he opened the door and I walked through. The rest of the rangers who had been hovering nearby to hear what was happening scattered when we came out and suddenly decided they had things to do out of the office. "What's your plan for today, big man?" Glenn said. I ignored the obvious short joke and turned to face him. "Dogs," I said. "Dogs. We should get some search dogs out there." He opened his mouth and then got a thoughtful look. "That's actually a good idea. Thanks. Why don't you see if you can find some search and rescue dog units nearby?" "Why me?" "Because I'll be at the police department doing a composite sketch of our old man to hand out to people so we can find him and question him further," I said. "I mean, after all, he's our only suspect." Glenn gave me the slightest grin. "Sounds good," he said, heading for his desk as I went for the door. 2 hours later, I had a composite sketch that was a good resemblance of the man. I drove back to the station and found Glenn had been busy. "I found a team and they said they can be here tomorrow morning," Glenn said. "Great," I said, showing him the composite sketch. "That looks just like him," he said. "I'll make some copies." While I was there, I mentioned our missing hikers and checked to see if they had any missing persons reports, I said. They gave me info on the 3 reports they had gotten yesterday. I laid the folder on the desk beside the copier and spread the papers out so he could see them. "What are we looking for?" Glenn said. "Not sure. Anything that might give us some clue as to what happened." "They got lost or attacked," he said. "Did they? What makes you so sure that one of them didn't come along thinking of something other than a hike in the woods?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if something went wrong?" "Like what?" "Could be anything," I said. "You never know what could set someone off. Lovers quarrel, jealousy, being the butt of endless jokes." Glenn looked down at me and opened his mouth as if to say something. "It's good to see you two finally working together," Ken said, looking at our progress. "Yeah," Glenn said. "It's great to trust each other enough to work as a team." I smiled and nodded. Glenn found some search dogs. They'll be here tomorrow morning, and I had a composite sketch done of the old man from yesterday. "I thought you said he wasn't a suspect," Ken said. "Right now, he's all we have," I said, looking at Glenn. Glenn nodded. "Have you contacted any of the families?" Ken said. "Not yet," I said. "I figured we'd see what the dogs found first. If they strike out, we might have to call the families to get more info, but at this point, I wouldn't want to get their hopes up." "Sounds good," he said. "I'll leave you to it." As he walked away, Glenn said, "I appreciate you backing my theory. I looked up cryptids online last night." "Really?" he said, brightening. "What did you find?" "A lot of crackpot theories." His face fell. "But I also found some things that were interesting enough to think you might be right. There's some interesting stuff out there. And those skinwalkers are scary as hell. Maybe we should be carrying some more firepower." I looked at him for a moment. "Couldn't hurt," I said with a shrug. We went to the armory and grabbed the only remaining shotgun. It seemed like the other rangers had the same idea. We searched other trails around the area, avoiding the one the dogs would search in the morning to reduce the chance of us contaminating the scent. At the end of the day, we each went home to get some sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. The handlers met us bright and early with their dogs raring to go. Glenn tried to pet one and nearly lost some fingers. "Yeah, I wouldn't do that again," the handler said. "They're not the friendliest of animals." The dog he'd tried to pet reinforced his handler's statement by staring at Glenn and growling softly. "Enough," the handler said, rubbing the dog's fur. "He's on our side." We showed them the trail and they took the lead. The dog sniffed all over the trail all the way down to where we first saw the old man. At that point, it was like someone just gave them a triple shot of caffeine. They raced up the hillside, practically dragging their handlers. It was all Glenn could do to keep up. I'm ashamed to say I fell behind. Climbing a steep hillside isn't something I do every day. I was keeping up until the first time I slipped and nearly rolled down the hill. It was then that I traded speed for caution. When I got to the top, the dogs had found 3 tents. No one was looking into them, they were just looking at them. Even the dogs were pulling to get away from the tents. Their handlers had to tie them to trees to keep from getting dragged back down the hill. I looked from face to face and saw fear. "What happened?" I said to Glenn. "We solved the case," he said, looking ashen. I looked at him questioningly and he just walked away. I took the initiative and opened the flap of the closest tent. I wished I hadn't. The flies and the stench of decay hit me at the same time. I nearly lost my breakfast. Begrudgingly, I went to the next 2 tents and found a similar scene. No one else seemed to want to do anything other than get as far away from the tents as possible, so I picked up my radio and called Ken. "We found your hikers," I said. "They're all dead." The park became a 3-ring circus. Between the police, the press, and the families, no one had a moment's rest. If it wasn't the investigation, it was forensics complaining that their crime scene had been contaminated. If not that, it was a family member wanting to see where their loved one had died. If not that, it was the press shoving a camera and a microphone in the face of anyone they could. Mostly that face belonged to Glenn. He was young, he was good looking, and he put a good image out there for park rangers. Ken had told him to keep the press off his back, but I knew the real reason was to make the rangers look good. I mean, who wants to interview someone that's shorter than the weather girl? And Glenn soaked it all up. He loved every moment. The toughest thing for him was to keep from smiling. It doesn't really put forth a good impression if you're smiling during an interview about some brutal murders. People might get ideas, and he might get kicked off interview duty. What a shame. When the smoke cleared and the explanations started leaking out of police while cameras were in their faces, it came down to them labeling it an animal attack. They showed tracks and claw marks which were consistent with a mountain lion. That nearly sent Glenn into convulsions. He must have said, "I told you so 100 times, all on the same day he found out." I did my best to ignore him. It wasn't too tough. All I had to do was tell him a reporter wanted an interview and he was gone. It was then he made his mistake. Ken had told him not to mention cryptids to anyone, especially the press. To his credit, he held it together and obeyed for a while, but once it was labeled an animal attack, all bets were off. After the first interview where he said they had a suspect that he believed was a skinwalker, the reporter gave him a look like he was weak old garbage that had been sitting in the sun. After the second similar interview, there wasn't a third. No one came to him anymore. Hell, I even got interviewed after that. They were so desperate for someone who wasn't convinced it was a cryptid. Ken was furious. He pulled Glenn off the crime scene and posted him at the furthest spot away from the site. I got the wonderful job of keeping an eye on him. But it was far from over for Glenn. He doubled down on his resolve that it was the old man in the form of a skinwalker. For a while, after things settled down, it was annoying. Once a couple of weeks had gone by, everyone was tired of it. "Just give it a rest, will you?" Ken told him. "We've set out traps and we'll get the rogue animal that did it." "Only if you set out traps at the liquor store or soup kitchen," Glenn said. "Enough," Ken said. "I don't want to hear one more word." He turned and went into his office, slamming the door behind him. Glenn stormed out the front door and slammed it behind him. I sighed, knowing I was supposed to go be the supportive coworker, which meant listening to him complain for the rest of the day. I got into the company truck and Glenn was already in the passenger seat. I slid the seat forward so I could reach the pedals and buckled my seatbelt. He was silent and wouldn't make eye contact. I started the truck and drove slowly away from the station on our normal patrol route. "You think I'm crazy too, don't you?" he said with his head slumped against the window, looking out like a little kid that's been told to sit still. I don't think you're crazy, I just think you're... He glanced over at me as I struggled with my next words. Overly committed to your theory. He sighed and leaned his head back on the window. So, you think I'm crazy? I never said that. What do they call a new patient in a mental hospital? I don't know. Committed. I hung my head. There was no winning, so I stopped talking. The rest of our day was like that. He pouted as we did our patrols. It was the most peaceful day I'd had since I got teamed with Glenn. As we were driving back at the end of the day, Glenn suddenly perked up. Stop, he said. What? Stop the truck right now. I hit the brakes and he ripped his door open before the truck was fully stopped. He was out and running through a field. I finally saw what he was chasing. Oh no, I said, jumping out and running after him. He ran like a madman, chasing his prey, a mountain lion. I see you, he yelled at the animal, pulling out his sidearm and firing a shot at it. Glenn, I yelled, but he was a good 50 yards ahead of me and pulling away fast. If anyone had seen it, they'd say it was the most ridiculous chase scene they'd ever seen. Glenn chasing a mountain lion, firing at it when he got a clear shot, me chasing after Glenn, trying and failing to keep up. It reminded me of that scene in the first Jumanji movie where the one rhino was always behind the rest of the stampede. Finally, I caught up to him only because he had stopped and was sitting in the field. I stopped beside him, breathing hard. What was that about? I said between breaths. I can't let it go, he said, sitting on his knees with his head down, holding the gun sitting on top of his leg with the slide locked back. He had emptied his entire clip at the animal. I know you want to get this thing for what it did, I said. Everyone does, but you can't just go shooting in the park like that. What if you had shot someone? I can't let it go, he screamed at me. Every night I dream about how I had him. He was as close to me as you are right now, and I let him go. You made me let him go. His face had turned toward mine and his eyes were full of rage. Why did you make me let him go? He said, rising off the ground and glaring down at me. It wasn't him, I said. It was just an animal that attacked those hikers. How do you know? He said, pointing the gun at me apparently without realizing it was empty. What do you mean, how do I know? I said, involuntarily raising my hands. You were there with me. You saw the animal the same as I did. Then you told me to let it go, he snarled. Why did you do that? If you remember, I pulled my gun out and you told me not to shoot it. He blinked. His face turned from rage to doubt to confusion. I do remember, he said, his eyes turning back to rage as if flipping the channel on a TV. I remember you fired in the air and chased it off. We didn't know what it had done then. Didn't you? He said. Or were you helping him out? Helping a mountain lion, I said incredulously. Do you hear the words coming out of your mouth? It wasn't a lion, he said through gritted teeth. It was a cryptid. I've heard enough of this for the last time, I said, turning and walking away. The next thing I felt was pain as a solid chunk of metal bashed me in the back of the skull. I saw stars. I have no idea how I stayed conscious, but I hit the ground hard. In a heartbeat, Glenn was on top of me. What the hell is wrong with you? I said, trying to push him away. You did this, he growled so animalistic that spittle flew. I did what? I said, trying and failing to fight him off. Turned into a lion behind you and somehow ran ahead of you without you seeing. Turned into a lion and ran through a field while still sitting beside you driving the truck. I don't know how, he said, punching me in the face repeatedly. I just know you did. I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't want to get the crap kicked out of me either. I went for broke and brought my knee up into his groin as hard as I could. He stopped and fell off me in slow motion, holding his damaged goods. I know you feel guilty about those hikers, I said. I do too, but there's nothing we can do about it now. We have to move on. He had rolled over onto his face and was struggling to breathe. I can't, he said. A handful of emotions rolled through my mind in a heartbeat. Frustration, anger, pity, helplessness. Finally, I stood and looked down at him. Then I feel sorry for you. I reached up and felt the bump on my head where he had pistol whipped me as I slowly walked back to the truck. I got in and sat for a long time, waiting for him to come back. After an hour, I gave up and drove out into the field, but he was gone. I found the spot where the grass was disturbed by our fight, but he wasn't there. I was alone in the middle of the field with a choice to make. Do I tell Ken about the incident, or do I give Glenn time to cool off? It was no secret, I was never a big Glenn fan, but I understood his commitment to his belief. Giving him a chance was the way to go, even though it had risks. What if he decided the old man was a cryptid and hunted him down? What if someone else got in his way or tried to reason with him? I regretted not taking his gun when I could. I continued my patrol through the park. Aside from people needing help, I kept my eyes peeled for Glenn. At the end of the day, I hadn't found either thing I'd watched for, trouble, or Glenn. That sounds redundant, but oh well. Mostly the reason I hadn't found trouble was that the park had become a ghost town. No one wanted to hike on the trails when they could be hunted down and eviscerated for their trouble. What surprised me was that the park hadn't been overrun by cryptid hunters, if such a thing existed, or other film crews in less than reputable newspapers. I guess Ken had been working overtime to keep the story from taking the cryptid turn. As I drove slowly down the dirt road that ran through the park, I noticed something moving in the trees beside me. I stopped the truck and watched, but it disappeared. I started going again, and after a minute I saw something dart through the trees beside me again. This time it seemed like it was a little bit closer. I had no doubt something was following me. I drove faster back to the station, hoping it would lose interest, or maybe get tired, but when I got there, I could see eyes in the trees staring at me, waiting, daring me to get out of the truck. I was trapped. If I tried to get to my car, there was no doubt it would devour me. I considered driving the company truck home, even though it might get me fired. But even then, I wasn't sure I would lose this thing. It had followed me for miles and my house wasn't that far away. I lowered my window and saw the thing get a little closer until I pulled out my gun and aimed between its eyes. It vanished in a heartbeat. I took the time to run from the company truck to my car, hoping it wasn't just pretending to be afraid to lure me out into the open. I made it to my car, slammed and locked the door, then sat there breathing hard for a moment before starting the engine and heading home. I was on high alert as I drove. I didn't see any way that thing could follow me at 55 miles per hour heading down the road, but then again, I lived only a half dozen miles from the park. When I got home and parked, the fear grabbed me once again. I did a long, thorough scan of the area before I opened my car door. When I was satisfied that nothing sinister was out there waiting to get me, I ran to the house and dropped the keys a few times just like they did in every horror movie before finally opening the door. I dove inside and did a quick U-turn, leaning against the door as I locked it. I slid to the floor, leaning against the door trying to control my breathing while thinking about the creature that had chased me. I never got a good look at it, but years of being a park ranger and tracker told me it didn't have good intentions. It took me a few minutes, but eventually the fear bled off and was replaced by calmer thoughts. I'm home, I'm safe, I have no idea what that thing's real intentions were. I got up and made myself some bacon and eggs for supper. After that, I sat in my recliner and watched some YouTube videos on TV while I ate. I avoided the usual creepypastas in favor of watching some relaxing videos of slime reveals before switching over to trick shots. I started to fall asleep in my chair, so I got up and took my plate over to the sink. While I was washing it, I glanced out the window, and I could swear I saw those eyes staring at me from behind a tree in my yard. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but this time there were no eyes. It was just my imagination, I thought nervously, hoping I believed it. I shook it off and went to bed. I won't lie and say I fell into instant, blissful slumber, but eventually I did fall off to sleep. I woke to the sound of my front door shutting. My mind tried to tell me it was just a dream when I heard floorboards creaking. I was up in a heartbeat, my hand already in the bedstand drawer to pull out my handgun. I slowly crept to the bedroom door and listened for a moment. There was no sound. I wondered if I was still dreaming when I heard a door open. My spine turned to ice. I gripped the gun a little tighter and strengthened my resolve as I swung the door open and looked around the room, pointing the gun wherever I looked. I saw a shadow move in my kitchen and yelled, "Freeze." The shadow stopped. I took a few steps closer, trying to see who the perpetrator was, all the while aiming at the head. "Turn around, slowly," I said. The shadow complied, slowly revealing its identity. I flicked the safety on and dropped the gun to my side. "Really?" I said as I stepped past the shadow and grabbed a beer out of the fridge. "You ever hear of these things called phones?" He reached past me and got a beer out of my fridge as well. I shook my head and went to my recliner before he could get to it. He followed me inside when I sat in the recliner, then looked disdainfully at the couch and finally sat. "Looks like we need to have a chat," I said, popping the can and taking a drink. "About what?" he said, taking a drink of his own. "You know exactly what." "No, why don't you tell me?" I sighed. "I thought we agreed you wouldn't hunt in the park." He took a long drink. "I could say the same about you." "What are you talking about?" "We both agreed not to hunt in the park." "I haven't," I said. He looked at me with doubt bleeding out of his eyes. "You and I have always agreed to tell each other the truth, no matter what," he said, "even when the truth is horrible." "Yes, we have," I said. "So why stop now?" "I haven't stopped," I said. "In fact, it's been over a year since I've transformed." He narrowed his eyes. "Tell the truth," he said. "I swear to you, grandfather, on the spirit of our ancestors, I have not transformed into my animal form in over a year." He leaned close and stared deeply into my eyes. I could see the doubt bleed away as he leaned back and took another drink. "Then we have a problem," he said, "because I only killed 2 campers. Those 3 you found, they weren't mine." "Then what were you doing on the trail that day?" "I was looking for you," he said. "I was trying to catch your scent and find out why you had broken your vow. But then I showed up with Glenn and you couldn't talk to me," I said. He nodded. I took a drink and leaned back in my chair, staring at him wide-eyed. "We have a bigger problem then," I said. "There's another predator in the park." "Do you know for sure, or is it just an animal?" "It followed me today. It may have followed me home." He looked at the door. "Are you sure?" I nodded slowly. "Should we hunt it down?" he said. "Do you want me to break my vow?" "No, grandson," he said solemnly. "I understand and respect your commitment. I'll change and track it. Right now," he shrugged. "Better to find out for sure." I finished my beer and stood as he transformed into the mountain lion we had seen on the trail. I went to open the door, but something felt wrong. I approached it slowly and listened. As soon as my ear touched the door, I jumped back. It was hot. I raced to the kitchen window and looked toward the front door. I could see an orange glow. "There's a fire on the front porch," I said. "We'll have to go out the back." He followed along to the back door, but it was jammed shut. I threw all my weight into it, but it refused to budge. "The basement," I said, starting to panic. We ran down the steps and tried the metal doors. They were already hot to the touch. I tried putting my shoulder into it, but there was something heavy on top of the doors holding them securely shut. "I'm open to ideas," I said to the lion. He looked at me for a moment, then ran upstairs. I followed him up to the 2nd floor, where he ran into the bathroom. He nudged the bathtub with his nose. I got in the tub and looked out the window. There was a small porch roof under the window that was within reach. Unfortunately, it was also on fire. I ducked back inside and told him about the fire. He turned the water on in the shower. The sprayer was on, and I was quickly drenched in water. "Okay, that did a lot of good," I said, sputtering water. He climbed up the shower curtain and nosed the shower head hose. I took the shower head out of its holder and pulled it toward the window. Fortunately, it reached and I was able to spray water onto the porch roof. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening, but then slowly the flames abated and our escape route was made clear. I was just about to step out when I saw a creature standing beside a tree that was right next to the house. It was waiting to ambush us. I ducked back inside and told the lion what was happening. He stared out the window and then was still. For a long moment, he looked like a statue as he thought of what to do next. He ran downstairs and reappeared a minute later carrying my gun in his mouth. I took it and stepped out through the window. The creature was still waiting, eyes focused on me. I aimed the gun at it and it ducked behind the tree. The lion jumped out onto the porch roof beside me. I gingerly stepped to the edge, feeling the boards underneath starting to give. I went for broke and jumped down, landing in a roll. I tried to get up, but the creature was on me. Its massive claws tore at me. I tried to raise the gun and get a shot off, but it swatted the weapon out of my hands. I fell backward, landing hard on the ground and knocking the wind out of me. It approached its helpless prey slowly and with the confidence of knowing the kill is coming soon. I fought the urge to transform. My mind debated with me, what good is your vow if you're dead? The creature was almost on me, but I hadn't recovered yet. I stared into its nightmare face that looked more like a deformed human face than that of any animal I'd seen. The rest of the body was huge like a bear, yet somehow leaner and longer. Drool dripped onto my cheek from its bared teeth. I could smell the stench of death. It drew back its massive claw but never got the chance to swing. A flash of gray tore at the arm. The creature howled in pain as it turned to face its attacker, only to have another flash of gray leave a vicious streak of claw marks down its side. The creature had forgotten all about its helpless prey and was now more concerned with self-preservation. It spun to face its attacker and again was left with claw marks. I crawled away from the fight and found my gun. I turned back to find the worst thing I could imagine. The creature had gotten a hold of Grandpa. He was slashing at every part of the creature's face and body he could reach, but the creature was going for the killing stroke. It squeezed with every ounce of energy. I heard pops and cracks as bones gave way. I aimed at the creature's face, but it turned and all I had to shoot at was the lion. I tried to get a better angle, but it shifted every time I did. Meanwhile, it kept squeezing the life out of my grandfather. I was reaching the point of no return. If I transformed, I could save Grandpa's life, at the cost of breaking my vow which Grandpa wanted me to keep. It was really no choice. I closed my eyes and thought of the beast lying dormant within me. I could feel the animal wake. I dropped the gun and prepared for the pain when suddenly I heard sirens. The creature heard them too and dropped Grandpa before disappearing into the woods. I clamped control over the emerging beast and ran to Grandpa. He had transformed back into his human form and I could see blood pouring from several wounds. "Grandson," he said weakly, "you must always remember your vow. Do not unleash the creature you cannot control." "Shichai," I said with tears streaming down my cheeks. "We need to get you to a hospital." He tried to laugh, but it came out as raspy coughs that spewed blood. "It won't matter," he said, grabbing my hand. "Leave this place. Don't let this thing make a choice for you that you'll regret." The fire trucks had pulled up and a fireman ran up to me. "Are you okay?" he said. "Yes, but my grandfather." He took one look and ran to get the EMTs. By the time they got there, he was gone. The next few days were a blur. I don't remember much. I think I took a leave of absence. I know I didn't go to work. I just sat in the cheap motel room that was now my home, drank a lot, and felt sorry for myself. I don't want to say I got over the death of my grandfather. I'll never get over that until the creature who murdered him is dead, but I finally got myself together and went back to work. Fortunately, my car was far enough away from the flames, so I still had transportation. I drove to the station and was greeted by Ken at the door. "Welcome back," he said, offering his hand. "Sorry about your house. Is there anything I can do for you? I need some uniforms." "Yeah, I figured as much," he said. "How are you doing otherwise?" I'm not sure what he was expecting me to say or how much he knew about my grandfather, so I went with the best answer. "I'm good." "That's great," he said, smiling. "It'll be good to have you back and everything can get back to normal after that missing hiker stuff got solved." "Solved?" "Yeah, Glenn took the reins and found the other two hikers. Or I guess I should say he found their bodies." "Glenn?" "Yep." "Did someone call my name?" Glenn said, walking out of the bathroom. He walked up to me, all smiles, looked down at me and shook my hand. "How's it going, partner?" "Pretty good, I guess," I said. "You tracked down the other hikers." "It was mostly luck," he said. "When I was out in that field, I went the wrong way back to the station and literally stumbled across them." "You mean when you pulled a gun on me because you were so distraught at not being the media's #1 ranger," I thought. "Good for you," I said. Ken came over and handed me new uniforms. "Thanks," I said, stepping into the bathroom. I changed and took the rest of them to my car. I closed my door and there was Glenn. "Hey," I said, taking a step back. "You sneaking up on me?" "Why would I do that?" he said, grinning. "No idea." I stepped past him and went to my company truck. "You want me to ride along?" he said. "No, I think I'm good," I said. "I need some alone time to get back in the swing of things." Okay, well if you need anything, give me a call. Thanks, I will, I said, driving away. I shook my head. Glenn broke the case after all, I thought. Good for him. As I drove off on a remote road through the park, my thoughts drifted from the events of the morning to the events of the last week, to the events of the last month. Eventually, they settled on my grandfather and how much I missed him. I remembered the times I visited his farm. I remembered when my mother passed away and I was sent to live with him. It's no stretch of the imagination that he was the reason I developed a love of the outdoors and respect for nature. He was the one who showed me my inner beast and how to control it. Until I was so focused on my thoughts that I almost drove off the road into a ravine. I slammed on the brakes and slid sideways on the dirt road before thankfully coming to a stop. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, then stepped out of the truck and did a slow lap around to make sure nothing was damaged. I was pleasantly surprised to find I had stopped with a few feet of clearance before sliding off the road to almost certain death. I looked over the edge where my truck and I had nearly careened and counted my blessings. It was a sheer drop of easily 300 feet. After that was a continuous downhill slope, ending at a ribbon of river far below. I stepped back and looked up into the clear sky, without a cloud to mar the perfect blue. A small group of dark spots caught my eye. I focused on them and saw it was a group of carrion birds. They were circling over a certain spot. Out of curiosity, I went to the truck and pulled out a set of binoculars. I looked at the area where they were circling and spotted a dark object laying on the ground. I tried to make it out but couldn't. I hopped in the truck and drove closer to where I'd seen it and tried again to look through the binoculars. This time, I could see exactly what it was. It was a body. I double-checked and saw claw marks and blood. I watched the body and saw the chest wasn't rising and falling. I drove as close as I could get, then jumped out and ran to it. I checked the neck for a pulse and found none. I rolled it over to check the injuries and found myself face to face with impossibility. Glenn's dead eyes stared up at me. How is this possible? I said, looking around as if the trees would somehow magically answer. I looked at the level of decay and it was clear this body had been here for at least a day, possibly more. I touched his bloody cheek and it was cold. I lifted his arm and rigor mortis had already set in. Who was that at the station this morning? I said to no one. Am I going crazy? I looked over the body laying there in a park ranger uniform. It had been shredded and soaked in blood. I rolled him over and found his wallet. I opened it up and found his driver's license. There was no doubt it was Glenn. As I pondered my sanity, I heard an animal cry. It wasn't a call I'd ever heard before. I dropped the wallet as chills ran up my spine. I jumped up and spun around, taking in my environment. I was certain someone or something was watching me. The trees all stared back at me. My animal side was screaming that danger was close. Panic gripped me as I raced back to the truck, convinced I was being hunted, that something was about to attack. Again, I resisted the urge to transform. I drove like a madman back to the station. I was almost there when Glenn stepped out on the road in front of me. I had to stand on the brakes to keep from running him over. He stepped up to the driver's side and knocked on the window. I rolled it down, trying not to make eye contact. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" he said with a grin plastered on his face. "Just heading back to the station," I said, trying to act nonchalant. "The way you were flying, you'd think the devil himself was chasing you." "Nope, just heading back," I said, my hands still gripping the wheel tightly. "You're so white you look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I said, not making eye contact. "Well, as long as you're heading to the station, do you mind if I catch a ride with you?" "Didn't you drive your truck?" "No, I was out walking the trail that started near the station." "I'm sure you were," I thought, looking for some fresh victims. My mind ran through a quick list of reasons why I should say no. None of them seemed plausible. "Sure, hop in," I heard myself say. When he got in the passenger side, I was tempted to jump out of the driver's side. I started driving and he didn't waste any time. "Did you ever find that old man?" he said. I gripped the wheel tighter. "What old man?" I said. "You know, the one on the trail that killed those hikers," he said, staring intently at me. "No, I never found him." "Shame, that was the only part I didn't figure out was where the killer went." It was unnerving how much this thing talked, moved, and acted exactly like Glenn, aside from the creepy grin. Who knows, I said, gesturing around at the passing trees. He could be around here somewhere, hiding in some dark corner where no one ever goes. I think we both know that isn't true, he said slowly. And how would we know that? He was silent for a long moment. Shame about your house, he said. How did it start? I gritted my teeth. He was toying with me. I don't know, I said, turning toward him. How did it? Why would I know? He said, wearing his best innocent face. I thought maybe you had heard some rumor, something in the air. I think I was too busy finding hikers to worry about such things. How are the ribs? I said as we took a hard left, forcing him into the door. I saw him wince ever so slightly when his side hit the door. Doing better, he said, then instantly realized his mistake. He turned toward me wearing one of his grins, but there was no mirth in it. It was pure malevolence. His mouth grew unnaturally wide. I could see teeth elongating. He was transforming. I slammed on the brakes, making us lurch forward. We're here, I said, looking around the parking lot of the station. Get out. His eyes bored into mine, brimming with fury, but he knew better than to try anything here. I watched as he stopped his transformation, then stepped out of the truck. He paused as he held the door open. Say hi to your lion friend for me, he said, then slammed the door and walked away. I watched him go, breathing a little easier with every step he took. He walked away from the station, away from the parking lot, and disappeared into the woods. I have no doubt he transformed as soon as he was out of sight. I released my white knuckle grip from the steering wheel and got out of the truck, walked to the station, and found Ken. How was your first day back? He said. Enlightening, I said. Have you noticed Glenn acting different lately? Different how? I don't know. I haven't been here. He just seems a little off. Ken paused as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Come to think of it, he has been a little different, in a good way. How's that? Well, he hasn't been as over the top talking about cryptids all the time. And of course, he's been super focused on finding those hikers. The 2 others we didn't find. 2. Oh no, after you found those 3, we had another 2 go missing on top of that. 2 more. But Glenn tracked them down, he said. Unfortunately, they were dead too, mauled the same way as the others. We still have yet to find the animal that killed them, so you be careful out there, okay? He patted me on the shoulder and walked away as I stood there soaking in the information. 2 more. It was then I realized that I had to stop this creature no matter what. I drove to the motel that was my interim home and headed for my room. Tomorrow was going to be a big day and I needed to get some rest. As I walked up the outside stairs, I glanced out toward the trees and saw a shadow disappear. I smiled to myself. Maybe I won't have to wait that long. I went into my room and locked the door, making sure the deadbolt was latched as well. I don't want to make it too easy, I thought. He might suspect something. I settled into bed and prepared. It was a little over an hour before I heard the barely audible click of the lock opening, followed by the faint scuff of the door on the worn carpet. I waited until he shut the door and approached my bed. You know the problem with predators, I said, hearing him freeze in his tracks. After a while they get this superiority complex and feel invulnerable, like nothing and no one can touch them. I turned to find the human version of Glenn staring down at me wearing that creepy grin. That's usually when they make a fatal mistake, I said. Oh really, he said, his smile elongating to inhumanly wide. And what mistake am I making with a little pissant wannabe ranger who couldn't even sense the predator that was right beside him? I smiled back. You of all people should know that appearances can be deceiving. I do, he said. Then he transformed into the creature that had burned down my house and killed my grandfather. The strength and ferocity radiated off him in waves. He stood there, flexing his claws, his breath heaving in and out like a steam engine. He wanted to drink in my fear and relish it. He wanted to kill me slowly, I could feel it. I took no small measure of satisfaction in seeing the claw marks that were healing on his sides. At least Grandpa did some damage to it. I got out of bed and stood in front of this creature that dwarfed me in size. It was easily brushing its head against the ceiling of the room. Its fur was so black it looked like even light was captured in it. I allowed him to think I was cringing in fear as I looked into that nightmare face, and then I darted for the door. He swung his massive claw at me but missed by mere inches. I cleared the door, escaped into the night air, and vaulted the railing of the second-story walkway. He was a heartbeat behind me. I could feel his breath as his pursuit grew closer. He grabbed my arm as I began to fall. I turned and saw the look of triumph on his face turn to doubt when he saw I wasn't cringing anymore. I was smiling. I grabbed his arm with my quickly growing hand. My eyes had grown large and bestial. My tiny 5'4" form exploded into a creature twice the size of the one I now held in my death grip. I saw the fear and recognition grow in his eyes as Hunter became prey. I twisted his arm behind him, feeling a satisfying crack of bone as I turned our momentum in midair, forcing him to hit the concrete on his back and me stomping on top of him. The concrete shattered, just like several of his ribs. His cry of pain was massive. I drank in his agony and hungered for more. I ripped the useless arm from his torso and began beating him to death with it. Blood flew everywhere as I landed blow after massive blow to his face, chest, groin, anywhere I could strike. He tried to use his other arm to block the blows, but it was only a matter of time. He tried rolling away from me, but it was feeble at best. His energy was waning, his blood poured out of his shoulder by the bucket. I stomped on his chest to keep him from rolling, then grabbed one of the stone planters that lined the parking lot and doubled as ashtrays. I smashed it into his face. Over and over, the heavy stone came crashing down on his face until it was a bloody pancake. But my rage was unquenched. I smashed it into his chest, collapsing his rib cage, and yet I wanted more. I had created a hole in the parking lot that the crushed body of the creature was falling deeper into. In the middle of my carnage, I saw the desk clerk peek his head out and look at me. I ran at him, not seeing an innocent bystander but more blood to be spilled. He jumped into his truck and drove away as fast as possible, leaving me with the bloody corpse of the creature I'd sworn to stop. My rage began to bleed away as I picked up the broken body and disappeared into the woods. Luckily, I didn't run across anyone else before I had the body buried, where no one could ever find it, and my creature had calmed down enough that I was able to transform back into my human form. Instead of hitching a ride to somewhere else, I walked back to the motel that was now surrounded by sheriff's cars and answered questions about what had happened. I told the story about how someone had broken into my room and attacked me, but I escaped and ran into the woods to hide. The deputy eyed me doubtfully until I told him I was a park ranger and knew lots of places in the woods to hide. No one could account for the sudden sinkhole appearing in the parking lot, and the clerk was found at a bar miles down the road, drunk as a skunk and blathering on about some huge creature that chased him. The next day on my way to work, I stopped by Grandpa's grave. Under his name and dates, there was an inscription. "Even though this stone covers my body, yet shall my spirit soar free." I kneeled in front of the stone. "I'm sorry, Grandfather. I broke my vow. I unleashed the beast inside me and nearly lost control. It was only luck that kept me from going on a killing spree. Even though I destroyed the creature who killed you, it would have been a hollow victory if the beast had gone on a rampage and killed more innocents, like the last time." I wiped a tear from my cheek. "I swear to you, I will never again transform into the beast. Even at the risk of my life, I will not chance the beast running rampant. I will spend the rest of my life keeping it caged." I stepped away from the stone, hoping there would never be another day like yesterday, knowing that this beast inside me must never again be allowed to see the light of day, no matter what.